If there were ever a lesson about human psychology that I thought needed to be relentlessly driven home and consistently, it would be the idea that human beings have a terrible sense of self-awareness and are loaded with cognitive biases. And by that, I mean with respect to everything. But specifically in this context, when I say that human beings have a terrible sense of self-awareness, I'm referring to their sense of reproductive psychology, which is to say, what really motivates them, why they're acting the way they're acting in any given situation or moment, why they find certain things and people attractive, and why they don't in other cases. Now, part of the problem here is the reality, the underlying reality of attraction and reproductive psychology and behavior is covered up, for arguably good reason, some might argue, by a smokescreen of civility and white lies. I've talked about this before. The fact that you don't tell people that they're really fat or unattractive, that sort of thing. Or, as an example, the fact that many people pretend that looks aren't that important, or if they are, other things are just as important, such as personality and humor and things of that nature. Now, of course, it's difficult to convince some people, but the reality is, when you actually look at the facts and how people truly actually act, remember, this is a universal, watch what they do, don't listen to what they say, then it turns out that that's just a bunch of poppycock, that these people who are consistently saying, oh, well, looks don't matter, blah, 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 that they're just talking out of their asses, effectively. And more importantly, they're not truly aware of what's really motivating them. What is the genuine motivation behind their interest in certain people? And so, with this premise, and I think it's largely accurate, and I've been saying it for years, that human beings don't have good self-awareness, I want to introduce this idea that has been talked about in studies and is referenced in an article, the fact, seeming fact at least in sample sizes provided in research, women seem to like men with narcissistic personality traits, the so-called dark triad of personality traits, to be more specific, which consists primarily of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And this isn't a precise science. This is not something that you could detail down to the last mathematical decimal point, which is to say, it's a general idea of certain personality traits, the dark triad, that seems to sync with general observable trends and the data that result from these trends. And so yes, interestingly enough, women seem, in the majority, to prefer men with the dark triad of traits, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. However, a small minority of women in these studies was shown to not take an interest in this sort of personality or series of traits. Now, from what I've looked into in my investigation of these studies, there is no real positing as to why, or there aren't very good reasons as to why, in terms of the postulations, women would take an interest in this. And before I get into that, I want to add another subject here, that is hybristophilia, something that has been talked about in the past, this attraction to violent behavior. Context of the modern term seems to refer to violent criminals. Women who become infatuated are interested in criminals with very violent criminal records, but these guys are also charismatic. No, the original sense is having a very strong preference for hubris, because a person who revels in destruction and is confident and charismatic likely will have a lot of arrogance. He will be a person of great hubris. So there seems to be some overlap here. But why is it, at least according to the studies, that women seem to prefer this type of guy? You know, tall, dark, and handsome. It's a bit of a meme, but they often don't mention the accompanying attributes that are very popular amongst women. Well, some people have proposed that it's simply the women being tricked by men feigning confidence. These are in fact other qualities, not genuine confidence. Women like confidence. But I don't think it's that. In fact, I think confidence is a lot less precise than talking about distinct personality traits, if I'm perfectly honest. So what's really behind this? Well, I think whether it comes to hybristophilia outright, in the cases of men like Charles Manson or Richard Ramirez, or more mild cases of light psychopathy, narcissistic tendencies and or Machiavellianism. What we're really looking at here is a kind of reproductive strategy, obviously, but one that focuses on a man's willingness and wherewithal to get things done. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, sure, women always expect men to get things done. That's just the way women are. But the dark triad of traits, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and lack of empathy, these things tend to imply a willingness to bulldoze people over in the process. They're willing to do anything to get things done. And from a reproductive perspective, that is potentially a very attractive trait. Imagine a man who's willing to do anything for you and your offspring, potentially. Social conventions be damned. Who cares about the ethics? And so from a very primitive perspective, it makes sense. A man who's willing to disregard everyone but himself is, at least in theory, a man who's willing to get the job done with respect to his partner and the offspring. Now, of course, the flip side to this is that this type of personality does not imply that the woman and the offspring that he might beget with that woman are necessarily going to be treated any better than the people he encounters in real life unawares and are manipulated by him or thrown to the gutter or outright removed. No, it's just an instinct based on a limited interpretation. And I think a lot of this is a holdover from times bygone. You see, something I've often driven home and repeat ad nauseum is that civilization is relatively young, but our evolutionary history is vast, labyrinthine, and very long. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that women to this day carry these traits, these interests, these instincts, and this sort of personality type. Now, not all of them do. The study revealed that a minority of women did not find this sort of thing attractive. And that would also explain why there are plenty of men out there that don't fit these personality traits, and to varying degrees, they also have success with women. But it is important to note that the probable reason why this is the case is because in a primitive environment, the man who displays a willingness and a wherewithal to run people over, if need be, or in this case, whack them with a club maybe, perhaps literally and metaphorically, is a man who's going to get the job done, procure the resources, and defend her and the offspring at all costs. And that becomes very alluring. Now, you see this sort of thing, in a way, in horrible books like 50 Shades of Grey, where the protagonist, the female protagonist, encounters this guy who is extremely wealthy, extremely handsome, difficult to tame, so very dangerous. But the idea behind it is that she can train him and rechannel that danger and potential psychopathy towards something productive, that she can bend him to her will. Of course, that doesn't usually work, which is why 50 Shades of Grey is a fantasy, the best-selling piece of literature ever written, apparently, but doesn't really mirror reality particularly well. And another reason why these sorts of arrangements, even though women potentially are very attracted to such men, are probably not going to turn out very well for the woman. Because men of this sort, because men who carry these personality traits of the dark triad are not typically the men who are allowing themselves to be cowed and browbeaten by women in a position of nigh servitude. So that explains why, on the one hand, something like 50 Shades of Grey is incredibly popular, but on the other hand, it also explains why it's absolute BS and why it has no basis in reality whatsoever, pure fantasy. I fully expect, in terms of mainstream academic research and other institutions, that this will never be well studied. After all, it doesn't necessarily reflect well on women. But to offer a counterpoint, men have similar wiring, not in the sense that they seek out the same things, but there's a kind of mindlessness to the way women look at the dark triad personality traits and find it attractive. In the same sense, there's a kind of mindlessness to the male mentality of she's hot, that's sufficient, right? How many relationships have been started by men or pursued by men simply because the female was sufficiently attractive without paying any attention to any of the other traits? And what usually results as a consequence of this is some mixture, best case scenario, of a relationship where you might want to bang her, but that's about it, and you tolerate her, best case scenario. And in many other situations, it turns out to be pretty intolerable. So that's the unthinking instinct of the male. Oh, she's hot, that's good enough, rather than looking at the other attributes and qualities and considering these other things if indeed a man wants to pursue a relationship with a woman. Both men and women suffer from this lack of awareness. It's just implemented differently because men and women are quite different. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the like button if you've not yet done so. Hit the subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed. Do share the video and hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos. And as always, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Until the next time, bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.